Hello, I'm Mike Tanner, and I preach at Central Baptist Church in Roebling, Louisiana. I'm recording this message and future messages for when our members cannot attend a particular service, and for anyone who finds these messages useful. This message concerns faith, which is a foundational word in the Christian faith. But its definition and use and misuse has changed over the last roughly 300 years. First, I'd like to begin with what the Bible says about faith. What the word faith meant to the writers of the New Testament. Let's look at Hebrews 11, 1 through 3 in the New King James Version. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. There's a lot there that needs to be unpacked. But first, we really need to dig into the word faith, and as I mentioned, what it meant to the writers, and what it means today, and how we got to where we are today concerning the word faith. Is faith reasonable? When we hear the word faith today, the way it is used, the way it is thought of, does faith imply that there's no substance behind it? There's no need for any tangible facts? Let's look at how we got to where we are today. A schism between religion and science occurred, as I mentioned earlier, around 300 years ago. This separation between religion and science has widened and continues to widen today. Science feared that religion would impede scientific discovery. On the other hand, religion feared that science would disprove religion. As I typed here, ironically lacking faith. Strong faith would trust that science would prove religion. Science accused religion of blind faith, and religion embraced that position. Both science and religion distanced themselves from each other. And for religion, faith became a noun, a trust in what you believe. And as I mentioned, religion embraced that position. They were fine with basing everything just on faith. And I believe that that came from a fear that science would disprove their faith. But again, faith means that you have to overcome that fear. And true, strong faith would believe that science is going to prove faith. Let's look at how we know what we do know. We know things through our senses, right? We hear things, be it words, sounds. We touch things. We feel things. We smell things. We taste things. We all know the five senses, right? So we use our senses to take data in. That's how we collect data. As a computer takes words in that somebody types, we take it in through our senses. And when we process it, in our minds, we reason these things. And once we've reasoned this data and analyzed that data in our brains, that turns into knowledge, right? Let's see how faith fits into knowledge. Now, as I mentioned, we have our data collected through our senses. We have the reasoning, the processing of that data, just as a computer processes data and creates knowledge. So, how does faith fit? Today it doesn't fit. You see the arrows pointing away from the word faith, pointing away from senses, away from reason. But is that true? What I'm going to talk about in a moment is how faith, in its true use, is not tightly coupled to religion. And that there's faith all over the place. There's faith in every part of our lives. We use faith in our daily lives. We use faith all the time, in its true sense of its meaning. We trust in nature. We have faith in nature. The sun will rise, gravity, the cycle of the seasons, and seeds will grow if we plant the seeds. We have faith that historical figures actually existed. George Washington, Julius Caesar. We have faith in that based on the data. We have everyday faith. Water will flow from a faucet. Light switch will work and lights will come on. Traffic lights will work correctly. Not 100% faith in all of those things, but reasonable faith. Here's some other things we have faith in. We have faith that a bridge will hold us. We have faith that a plane will fly us. We have faith that an airbag will go off if we have a crash in our vehicle. All these things we have faith in based on data that we may or may not have access to, or faith in the individuals who have that data, faith in individuals who designed these things, faith that we have seen them work in the past. Mainly, from a common person's perspective, we have faith in these things because we see them work. We have seen them work, and we've seen them with our own eyes, and so we're using those senses to take that data in, and then we have faith in that. Now, could we have more faith because we understand the engineering principles and the science behind all of that and the history behind all these things? Yes, we could. But we have faith just generated because of our looking and seeing these things actually occur. So let's take George Washington's existence as an example. So how do we know that George Washington actually existed? Well, we have pictures of him. We have writings that he actually wrote, that we believe that he actually wrote. We have statues that were created. We have his picture on coins. But can we say 100% that George Washington existed? Well, I think you're at 99.9%, right? There's always this potential that the data could have been skewed, the data could have been created that falsified his existence, but I think we can be relatively sure that he did. What about Julius Caesar? Well, like George Washington, we have statues, in this case a bust. We have coins with his picture on it and his name. We have historical writings from the time period when he lived. So, very similar to George Washington. Only the difference is that instead of 200 years, we're talking about 2,000 years. So, can we be 100% sure that he existed? Well, again, close to what our faith is in George Washington's existence. Let's look at something else that we have faith in. Something scientific. Actually, something very scientific. The atom. We know that material, or we've been taught that material is made up of atoms. And since 1955, let's look at something else. Let's look at something scientific, something very scientific, the atom. We've been taught that all material is made up of atoms. And since 1955, science has been able to create pictures of atoms, in a way. And their ability to do this has improved, especially over the last 20 years, using something called an atomic force microscope and a scanning tunneling microscope. They've been able to use these microscopes by placing the tip from the scope that gets extremely close to the surface of the material that you're measuring or trying to isolate an atom from, and it detects the electrical currents or forces between the tip of the microscope and the atoms. So then the data is processed and it creates an image. Now, while we do have pictures of atoms, the images are produced through indirect means and interpreted from data collected at the atomic scale, and then creates an image based on that data. But it's not photographic data, right? It's actually data measuring the electrical forces of that atom. And so while we can create an image based on the data, we can't actually see an atom. So we're using senses. We're using a sensing telescope, right, to sense that. It basically an extension of our fingers. And as we learned, we take that sense data and we reason that data and we make a determination or an assumption that something does or does not exist, in this case, the atom. As I mentioned earlier, I asked the question, is religious faith anti-reason? Let's look at the reasoning for faith. And is there any sense data associated with faith in order for us to reason and make an assumption based on that reasoning? Just as we looked at George Washington and Julius Caesar's data, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just as we looked at George Washington and Julius Caesar and the data associated with their existence, let's now look at the data associated with Jesus Christ's existence. Roman historian Tacitus, who wrote in the 2nd century AD, wrote about Jesus Christ. He actually says, Tacitus identifies Jesus as Christus, Latin for the word for Christ. And he acknowledges him as the origin of the Christian name and of the Christian movement. Tacitus confirms that Jesus was executed under the authority of Pontius Pilate during the Emperor Tiberius' reign. Tacitus describes Christianity in a dismissive tone, reflecting Roman disdain for the movement. Tacitus notes that the movement, though suppressed initially, spread from Judea to Rome. And Tacitus provides an independent Roman perspective on Jesus and early Christianity. And he's considered a reliable historian, and this passage that he writes is often cited as evidence that Jesus was an historical figure who was executed in Judea. And this is significant because it confirms that early Christianity was present in Rome by the mid-1st century. And the fact that it was written by a non-Christian with no vested interest in promoting Christianity is one of the earliest non-biblical references to Jesus and his followers. So, Josephus, he was a Jewish historian who wrote in the late 1st century, mid to late 1st century. Let's look at Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian. He wrote in the mid-1st century, very close to the time of Jesus Christ. And this is what he wrote. Now there were about this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the 3rd day. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Now Josephus also references James, brother of Jesus. He states, Ananias, the high priest, assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So here we have somebody who is not a proponent of Christianity. It functions as another independent source of evidence that Jesus existed and was known as the Christ, meaning the Anointed One. And it identifies James as Jesus' brother, adding historical grounding to the early Christian tradition. Josephus' writings are among the earliest non-Christian sources mentioning Jesus and provides the independent attestation to his historical existence. Josephus acknowledges the existence of Christians and their association with Jesus, showing the movement was significant enough to warrant notice by a renowned Jewish historian. Of course, we also have biblical evidence of Jesus' existence. Let's look at spirituality. And the reason I bring up spirituality is because there's a lot of talk in today's society. Spirituality is becoming more and more accepted. We have people confirming spiritual experiences. Spirituality in general. Is spirituality a sense? Can that be the next sense, the sixth sense? ESP at one point was referred to as that. Is there scientific evidence of spirituality? Well, there is, and you can make the argument that there is. In quantum physics, there's called the entanglement. That's how quantum computers work. I don't want to get into all the technicalities there, but it provides a framework and a scientific foundation for spirituality as what we see and feel as spirituality to exist. Science is moving towards that. They may not call it spirituality, but if from a spiritual perspective, looking at it, it's easy to come to that conclusion. However, is spirituality a valid method, a valid sense for collecting data and for reasoning that data in making knowledge from that? Let's revisit Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, in light of what we've learned about faith and its practicality in our daily lives, how we utilize it, and how we have faith in practical things in our lives. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I think it'd be a good idea to look at the Greek word that translates into faith, since that would give us an idea of what the original authors of the New Testament had in mind here. So that word translates into trust, confidence, belief, and it has a suggestion of a relational, practical trust, like we've just been talking about, and how we utilize the word faith in our daily lives when it's not associated with a religion. But they didn't differentiate it that way. Now, we can also look at the word that's used for things hoped for. And that word translates into a forward-looking trust in God's promises. Like, it's not wishful thinking. It's a confident expectation. It's what hope really means. It's not the way we use hope. Like I hope I'm going to win the lottery. That's not the kind of hope or the definition of hope that is intended in the Bible. It is the Greek definition of that, which is a confident expectation that something's going to happen. Now, we can also look at substance, which in the NIV is translated as assurance. But the Greek meaning of that word is substance, essence, confidence, foundation. It's something firm. It's a confident. It's something substantive, right? It implies a firm foundation or a reality upon which something which hope rests on. It's building upon that hope. It's establishing a foundation for that hope, so that the hope isn't just a wish. Hope is not synonymous with the word wish. And so in looking at that, it should come across that what is being described in this verse is the type of faith that we're talking about, or that we talked about earlier, that happens in our daily lives, and that they're applying this to the type of faith that we have in Jesus Christ. Now let's look at verse 2. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. Well, testimony can also be translated, and is translated, as witness. When you witness to someone about Jesus Christ, you're telling them your experience. You are a witness because of what has happened in your life. You're giving them a testimony, like someone giving a testimony in a trial. You're telling what you saw, what you experienced. You're giving them evidence, right? And they're saying that the elders obtained this. The elders either directly, we can go down the progression, but the elders experienced, they met Jesus Christ. They witnessed Jesus. They saw Jesus Christ. They saw what he did. They saw that he rose again. And that's what we're talking about here. That type of witness. And they're saying that the elders passed that down to the next generation and so on. Well, that's similar to what we just talked about earlier in the historians' writing and the history that's transpired. They're saying there is a sound history to rely on to base that foundational faith. Now let's look at verse 3. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. Now this is really interesting in relation to what we had talked about earlier, right? In having faith in things, faith in things that we had not seen. And so if we apply that, again, they use the word faith, and they say that because of that faith, they understand. They understand that the worlds were framed, or the word also can be translated as it is in the NIV as were formed by the word of God. It refers to God's intentional act of creating and ordering the universe. The literal translation of the word that's used for worlds, or in the NIV, instead of worlds, it's translated as universe. But the literal Greek translation is the ages, and in that it's referring to time and space and encompassing all created reality. It's much richer, right? It's much richer when you look at the Greek and work this backwards into the English. But we get a sense of what the writers were trying to convey here. And so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. Okay, let's think back of what we looked at earlier concerning the atom, right? We can't see the atom. We can only detect it. Is it not visible? I find that very interesting that that it states this, and we're talking 2,000 years ago. Things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. Well, I think that's extremely interesting, right? At the beginning, when we were talking about faith, we talked about how it is now typically used as a synonym of belief. Just believing in something. Nothing underneath it, nothing holding it up. Didn't require that. You just believe in what you believe. But I think we've learned today that that's not the case. In reality, we use the word faith, and we have faith in things based on our senses and our reasoning. We take in the data, we reason that data, we process that data, and we make assumptions. In this case, we have faith that because of the data we have on something, We can have faith on something to do what we've seen it do what we believe it will do based on the data that we have collected through our census. We can have faith that George Washington exists because we have data, we process that, now we have faith in that. But I think the word faith has been misused for so long now that it lacks the meaning that we really intend for it. And I would say that we need to replace it with trust when we think about faith in all times, especially when we're talking about faith in Jesus Christ. And sometimes we do see the word trust used in trusting in Jesus Christ and trust in Jesus that He will do what He promised He would do. We can have trust in that, but I still think when we say that, we're not fully giving credit for the word faith or trust. And that's not what the writers of the Bible intended. That's not what the writer of chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, is intended to get across to us. It's much more than that. It's a sound foundation, just like anything else in our daily lives. So is blind faith good? Or is blind faith necessary in any way? I think that when there was this division between science and religion, I think religion was fine going that direction. I don't think it was necessary. I think it showed a lack of true faith, a lack of trust. I think it showed a fear in what science may uncover, and that fear is a lack of faith and a lack of trust. I think there's enough evidence for Jesus Christ. I think there's enough evidence in history. I think there's enough evidence in archaeology. I think there's enough evidence in the Bible. I think there's enough evidence in spirituality for personal experiences in our lives. And I don't think we need to fear science. I think we need to trust that God created this universe and that anything we discover will point back to Him. And I think this discoveries that we keep, as we keep digging and digging, point to Jesus Christ. That's another sermon. But I do not believe that we need blind faith in Christianity. It's not necessary. And I think what happens is when we have a blind faith, it makes our religion undefendable. And it is defendable. We just need to be aware of the facts that make it defendable. And we need to be prepared to defend it, as Paul says, and to have an answer. And blind faith does not prepare the believer to defend the faith. And so I do not believe it's healthy. Well, I think that there can be a religion and science reconvergence. I think that it's possible. I think that science is moving closer to understanding and to seeing that spirituality is there. We're seeing it a lot referenced in many ways, but I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that there's risk there because the spirituality or the religion that the science community may take us towards may not be based in Jesus Christ. As Christians, I think we need to be aware of the science. We need to stay close and understand so that we are prepared that if there is this convergence that does happen, that we're ready to defend Christianity and to explain how Jesus Christ is the spirituality and the religion that we should be pointing to. There's so much evil in this world and so much deception that people could be drawn towards the evil side and towards Satan and not towards God. And I believe that's the risk here. And we need to be prepared. and we certainly don't need blind faith if that should happen. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, I hope you would share it with friends and family. I look forward to preparing more messages, and I thank you for watching.